I'm in the funeral business, so I got a little newspaper that is the funeral news. And it actually brings up with the topic that some of you had asked about. I don't remember who asked about it, but green burials. And so I looked up this place, Batesville, which is a coffin maker. And let me show you that little promotional video to start off. That's a good, a good way to start here. So let's share a screen with, let's optimize for a video clip. And you can see the promotional video for our product here. All right, so let me stop sharing that now. Make sure I don't get another video here. Close that out. Okay, so that was for Batesville selling you a green coffin. Interesting piece here. So I had never actually heard this term green burial before, and I think I know why. And the answer you're going to see is we're very similar to green burial, so we haven't had to use that term in that same way. So I'm going to pull up my source sheet here, and I will show you. Here is what green burial is. All right, so they go through and they say green burial. It is this is according to the greenburialcouncil.org. So this is an organization that deals with green burial, and they are saying to us, it is caring for the dead, the deceased, with minimal environmental impact that aids the conservation of natural resources, reducing carbon emissions, protection of worker health, restoration or preservation of habitat. So those are for the grounds. And then for the actual cemetery, we don't want to use toxic embalming, does away with vaults. We can talk a little bit about vaults. Chooses biodegradable containers, caskets, shrouds, and urns. Discontinues herbicides, pesticides, and fertilizers. So they want to make sure that you're keeping things green there. Encourages sustainable management practices. You can use non-native stone, may use non-native stone markers, so you can still use traditional stones and graves because they don't see that as a problem. And may support land conservation efforts. So it might help for other pieces here. So that's what this organization, greenburialcouncil.org, defines as green burial, right? Something that is not going to affect the earth. As you're going to go through, you're going to see I guess we were trendy before the trend came around. We've been into green burial for 2,000 years. We just didn't know it. So when we look at this, I'll go back to my source sheet. But these are things that people are talking about now, is this idea of green burial and minimal environmental impact. When you looked at that video, why were they trying to sell this as a generational something to look forward to for the rest of the generation? This is one of 3 products they're coming out with. Why was this coffin a green coffin? Any thoughts? Okay, I see a hand raised.
Was it more biodegradable than the really fancy ones with upholstery and metal decorations? Though to me it looked as if it had so much more stuff than a plain pine box.
So good. So these look a little bit more plain. They're using water-based finishes is one of the things that when I read the article. So they don't want varnishes that are going to not biodegrade so quickly. It's interesting. That's something. While it's not practiced to really do varnishes are less of an issue in Jewish burial. But we don't typically use it. what our definition of Jewish, and by the way, I don't know if you noticed in the video, it said minimal metal. It didn't say no metal. For Jewish burial, for Jewish coffins, it is in fact it's a no metal production. So I can actually show you. I'll put this back on the screen. A showroom here, an online showroom for kosher coffins, and we can look at them, and we can talk about whether you think these are all halachic. They're all within Jewish law. Are some of them beyond the kind of the meta halachic of what we've been learning so far about burial? So let's look at the screen here. All right, here's our screen. And in it we have, this is page 1, the Nahum, the Ira, the Don, the Gideon, the Red Adom, the Ramah, the Adom, the Shimon, the Simeon, the Benjamin, the Ovadia, the Asher, the David, the Tohar, Yerushalayim, Yissachar, and all the way up in there, the Hezekiah. And for a whopping $15K, you can get your Hezekiah coffin that actually has no metal involved with it. It is it fits within the norms of traditional halacha, which is you really shouldn't be using any wood. So letter of the law Hezekiah is kosher. All right, but what did we learn last week about the tachrichin that might inform our coffin conversation here? Anybody remember?
It was simple and easily, inexpensive and simple, basic. I guess that everyone was going to be in similar outfits.
Exactly, and that was the idea. Rabban Gamliel said, I'm the greatest rabbi of my generation. I'm not going to dress in these fancy garbs because I don't want someone to feel too poor to die. Right? I do think there's probably some other piece there that isn't in the halakhic literature, but think about where, like, we like to, as Jews, contrast ourselves in the ancient world with the Egyptians. Right? The Egyptians were these people that had these massive tombstones, these pyramids, like these massive markers. They would bring all their possessions with them. They would embalm their animals and their servants, by the way, so that way they could work with them in the afterlife. And we purposely have clothing that has no pockets in it because we want to make the statement, you don't bring your stuff with you, right? So traditionally, certainly the more traditional you go to, the more traditional funerals you go to, it will be that what they have is listed as the Nahum, although Nahum is still a little overpriced for my taking. That is that plain pine box that is simple, right? And this showroom even has it with little handles. Traditionally, when I've seen funerals, especially the funerals that we do at Hebrew Free Burial, there are no handles involved with it because, again, we're not using any metal pieces, so it becomes a real challenge to that construction when you're trying to make it as simple as possible. Okay, so let's talk about the why and the mindset of what we're doing here. All right, so we're going to go back into our source sheet here, and it's going to show to us. I just want to see if I can see my participants too. Give me 1 second here. Not sure why it's hiding you guys, but I'd rather see you too, so that way if you all right, I'm not going to get too stuck on this. All right, so look at our quote. This really is the essential piece here. This is Bereshit, right? Right at the beginning, when Hashem is talking to Adam, when God is talking to the first person, from it you were taken, and from dust you are, and from dust you shall return. This idea is in the essence of our burial practices, right? We want to, right? Even if you look at the name, Adam, it is coming from the same root, the same shorish as Adama, right? you come me offer the offer. You come from the dust to the dust. That's what our goal is to break down. In fact, when I told you last time about the tacharichin and you putting the clay shards, clay is made from earth, from that afar, from that dust, from that clay. And that's the same idea, is that you go from the dust to the dust. So again, in line with that question about the green burial, in line with that mindset, that is that's what happens. All right. And now we need to move forward. Again, if you have a question, feel free to 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 just chime in to like the timing of this. So let's go back.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
I wasn't well enough to come last week, and I apologize. I don't remember from the first week, but are you going to be sharing your source sheet other than in this session?
I'm happy to share it with Rabbi Foster, and he can then share it along. I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
I'm trying to go back and forth only because I'm having a real trouble being able to see you guys and do the source sheet, because for some reason on my sheet on my full screen I lose you guys, and I don't know what's going on here. But let's see if I do it in full screen, and then maybe if I do that, let's see, sometimes that helps. Okay. So here we are. Didn't help with that, but it's okay. This is the mindset. One suspends study of Torah for the sake of taking out the dead. This is in Shulchan Aruch. For those who want to kind of get the history of the timeline of Jewish law, Mishnah, the Torah is written, the Mishnah is written, the Torah is written, let's say, 4,000 years ago. The Mishnah is written 2,000 years ago. Now we're talking about the Talmud. Talmud's written about 1,400 years ago. This is now moving up further. This is about 500 years, 600 years, 400, 500 years old. We're going to start talking about Shulchan Aruch. We're going to start talking about this legal code that is written by Rabbi Yosef Karo, who's considered one of the greatest rabbis of the modern era. So his mindset is, if you're in the Beit Midrash and you're studying Torah and you hear that someone has to be buried, it's a higher priority than your Torah study to go and stop what you're doing and make sure this person is buried. Right? So it really takes a high precedence, right? And again, these sources are going to weave through time. A little bit behind him, we hear about where burial should happen, right? So Rambam, who's 1100s, we're going to hear, we dig the burial caves in the earth and make hollows at the side of the caves. So if you look at ancient burial sites, they are more of these hollows in the side of the caves. If you look at Ma'arat Machpelah, where the tomb of the patriarchs, it is inside a cave. They literally put it into the earth. If you look at our current burial, you can see exactly what he's saying. We dig burial caves. We dig into the ground, and we do it a different way. We bury the corpse with its face upward. So we always want to be you'll notice that when you're at a funeral, you probably will notice it now afterwards. They're very mindful of which way the body should be placed, and often on the coffin, you'll actually see someone write Rosh on the spot where the head is, so that way we know we're properly doing the burial. Okay, so then we place the earth and the stones back and put it above it. So we put them in the earth, and then we fill in the earth. And you may bury it. Interesting how he says it. You may bury a person in a wooden coffin. What does that imply? That implies that in his time, at least, coffins weren't as popular. It was done burial in your shrouds, and that's how it was done. And then this is something I like, and what my chaplain at our institution really kind of thinks of is those who accompany the corpse tell them to go in peace. As it says in Bereshit 2:2, like 15:15, Tavav, you will go with your ancestors in peace. Markings are made on the graves. This is your tomb. These are the markers. Tombstone is placed on the grave. And then it's interesting. For the righteous, by contrast, a tombstone is not placed because their words will cause them to be remembered. A person will not need to visit in the cemeteries. So I can get on a little bit some side stories about that, but it's an interesting idea that first you go with them in peace. My one of the people I work with, who is really a teacher to me, is Rabbi Shmuel Plofker, and he's the chaplain at our cemetery. We're trying to make it as affordable as possible at Hebrew Free Burial, so we have a chaplain on premises to do all the funerals, right? So he's doing probably more funerals than any rabbi in New York City because he's doing 300 a year at least. And he will. I mean, the truth is he has the same speeches he gives, but they're powerful speeches when you think about it. He says, when you have a guest come to your house, what do you do when they leave? Do you just say, okay, see you later, the door's over there, walk away, or do you walk them to the door? Do you hold do you try to have that last moment with them? Do you escort them? And when you are taking a body to the grave, you're taking a loved one. You're taking someone we cared about. We don't want to just say, okay, burial happened over there. And I know, by the way, not in a derogatory way, but I know in some other practices that is the custom. Is to say we leave the coffin here, and the workers are going to take care of the rest because I think the mindset is it's going to be too hard for me to do this burial. And the Jewish mindset is it is going to be hard for me. There is going to be it is going to be a difficult moment, but this person that I'm burying, he or she deserves that difficult moment. They deserve me being upset. Yeah, I should be upset that someone who I love is gone. I should have to do something difficult because it's a way of respect for that loved one, right? So I once had an interesting situation. I was the rabbi in Florida for 2 years in a small synagogue, and I had a congregant who had converted to Judaism and had a child from a different marriage. So the child was not Jewish, right? Because it was pre-conversion. And they said I was visiting her regularly. This child unfortunately had a major drug addiction problem, and the child was having liver failure, in the hospital. And I would visit because I was there to support. This is a family in my community. When she passed away, the family said to me, "Can you do the funeral?" So it was an interesting conversation for me because I don't do Christian funerals. I don't know the practices of Christianity. I said, I certainly can do this funeral. The only way I can do it is the way I know how to do it. So it'll be a funeral at a Christian funeral home with Christian burial, but any part of the procedure that I'm doing, we're going to do it my way because that's the only thing I know how to do. I can't be expected to know how to do someone else's customs. And they said, that's fine. We understand that. So I did the funeral. I gave a eulogy about this woman. Her friend spoke. It was actually very powerful. Her friend speaking about kind of the loss. The loss was not about the person who had died, but the opportunity that had never happened because of the addiction. And it was a really hard funeral. But all these friends who were not Jewish, when we got to the burial, because in Florida it works a little bit differently. I don't know how it works in Cleveland, but in Florida, the funeral homes are at the cemetery, almost exclusively. So you will literally finish the funeral, the doors open, the coffin is on a cart, and you walk with the cart out on the road to wherever the funeral is. That is how it's done. So I'm taking the coffin with it, and these people don't know what's going on because they're not used to this part of the procedure here. And I take it out to the grave, and we put it on the machine to lower it, the traditional, like the basic mechanical machine. We lower the body, and then I talk about we're now going to bury this woman, and I talk about the traditions about the earth, which I'll get into a little bit later. And I start doing it, and the people get so upset. How can you do this? It's so difficult. I can't handle being here. And I explain to them, you're right. It is upsetting. It's a time to be upset. It's okay. So much in our American culture, I think it's more than the Christian culture, but in our American culture, we want to hide those feelings sometimes. We want to say, Oh no, I can cry in private. I don't have to do things. I shouldn't let people see how I feel in public. It's okay. It's okay to feel that upsetness. So I think that there's this real piece when you're covering up the body of feeling it's okay to be upset. This is a horrible moment. It's really a sad moment. Um, all right. So Montevot, which is I think one of the questions that came up, is in this Rambam, and he says we put a tombstone on it, but he interestingly says tombstones don't get placed on tzaddikim, on righteous people, because they're going to be remembered by their words. I find that fascinating because I actually don't know of a tzaddik that doesn't have a very fancy burial. In fact, you want to get into Rambam's story. Rambam isn't buried at Rambam's grave. I hate to be a spoiler person about this. Rambam dies in Egypt, but the legend is that Rambam is on his way to Eretz Yisrael, which could have been true. He could have been on his way to Eretz Yisrael. And what we know is he's on his way and he never makes it to Israel. And so what the legend becomes is he dies on his camel, and his camel mystically makes its way to Tiberia, where he is left at the cemetery, and he's buried at that cemetery. So if you go to Tiberia, there is a shrine to Rambam. Let me see if I can pull it up really quickly. The tomb of Rambam. He would hate it based on his own halakha, and his own, I think, theological beliefs about whether or not he was carried by a mystical camel. But and that there's a mechitza on his grave too, which is also probably something he doesn't want. Here's a picture of it, although this is newer. This is older because it doesn't have the mechitza on it. I've seen it with the mechitza. Let me open it in a new tab, and then I'll show it to you. Open image in new tab. Let's put it up here, and I can show it to you. It also has one of the statement he would have loved about himself. All right, so this is Rambam's grave up in Tiberia. Has this big enclosing. It is certainly not a unmarked grave because his words do live on still to today. I spend time learning him every day, every week. And in fact, you can even see how well he is thought of by the words that are on his grave. So on the top of his grave, I'll say it in Hebrew, and then I'll tell you what it means. Memosha ad Moshe lo kam kamosha. All right, you see that? Memosha ad Moshe lo kam kamosha. So what does that mean? From Moses to Moses, no one stood like Moses. Which is what they're saying is from Moses, as in Moshe Rabbeinu, the first Moses, to Moses, Rambam, Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, right? Moses, the son of Maimon, Maimonides. There was no one like Moses. In the history of Jewish lore, he is only equal to Moshe Rabbeinu. So he would have actually liked that because he actually did think of himself pretty highly. But he would hate the fact of this coffin, this grave, because you don't need to put a grave by me. I'm something greater than that. My words live on. It's not about those pieces. And that still exists to today. I mean, my brother wanted to go to the let's see some marking here. My brother wanted to go to the grave of, why is it hiding out here? To the grave of the Rebbe, because there's a custom to go to the grave of the Rebbe when you're undergoing medical procedures. Unfortunately, my brother's having some medical issues, so he wanted to go to this grave. And you go to the grave, and I assure you, this rabbi who died almost 30 years ago, his grave is pretty well laid out. It's a grave, and then it's a stone wall around it, and then there's a enclosure on the entire grave. It's known as the Ohel, and it is a massive grave. So Rambam makes this statement that the righteous people should not actually have a tombstone. It's not followed by anybody. All right, so let's talk about some of the procedures that go into this burial piece here. All right, so I already showed you the coffin here and what the coffins look like. Kriya. Kriya is going to be the first thing that's going to happen right before the beginning of the funeral. There is Kriya for every Krovim, for all the close people. So again, the close people by halacha are parents, children, siblings, spouse. If you're in those groups, Kriya is traditionally done. For every group, for every person who does Kriya, with the exception of everybody who does Kriya, with the exception of the child for their parent, it is done on the right side of your body. You take a tear. For the parent, it goes on your left side. It goes over your heart, because the idea is you are actually it's a tear on your heart. Losing a parent is, I mean, I would argue that in the modern world it's not the same feeling as it was in the ancient world, but it's the hardest loss for in the mindset of the modern the ancient world, is losing your parent. It's your teacher. It's the person who's going to give you everything in your mindset. Today, I think that we would probably think about children in this way as well. But you have to remember, in the ancient world and in the not so ancient world, you got to go 100 years back to my cemetery, and we have rows and rows of infant burial. And there's a different mindset about loss of young children, I think, in the ancient world and in the modern world, because it's just so much more frequent. So it happens on your left side. In the conservative world and in the reform world, traditionally, people have these ribbons, which are, again, I think are totally fine and allowable. I think that, in my opinion, we can have a discussion about it. The actual tearing gets something deeper, right? When I did Kriya for my mother and I tore up a shirt, I didn't. First of all, I didn't tear up the best shirt in the world, but it's okay. Again, in the line of everything, this is the least of my concern. Is my quality of shirt at the funeral. I have other bigger concerns to fish to fry than that. Like, I have bigger things in my mind. But the idea that for the next week I'm going to wear this thing that I wore at the cemetery, that's going to be ripped and torn and will not be fixed, felt a little bit more raw to me. Felt a little bit deeper of a cut than a ribbon that at the end of the shiva I can put away, and it can be a memento. It's a different feeling to me, at least in my opinion, of the depth of this. This is okay. I've lost a shirt. People often do it on a shirt, and if they want to make it in something that, well, they can change their shirt and do something different about it, then they'll do a tie or a scarf, where you could wear the scarf over and over again. You could wear the tie over and over again as something that you can wear and reuse. But it's my own personal opinion. I've definitely done funerals with ribbons. I've also done them with traditional kriya, with the ripping of clothing. To me, it just feels more raw, and I think that's the nature of a burial. It's a raw feeling. All right, so the one requirement of your funeral / burial, right? I'm usually dealing with them as a combo thing, is this eulogy. It's called a hesped in Hebrew. And the goal of the hesped is to make the mourner cry. It's actually a part of it. What I say at that hesped has to do something, or whoever speaks the hesped, their goal is to make the mourner feel sorrow. And it sounds kind of ridiculous. Like, of course they're feeling sorrow. But again, I think, have a culture of kind of stoicism. I can take on everything. I'm not going to cry in front of all my friends. No, it's okay. Again, you're burying someone you love. It's an acceptable emotion, right? We're allowed to have feelings. And that's a goal of the funeral, of the burial, of the hesped. So you have the hesped. You make this cry. I actually skipped a piece too. On the way to the burial, right? I'm doing them in a graveside funeral. This would be different orders of non-graveside. There's a tradition of 7 stops you're saying a psalm, and you are going to bury the body. You're saying Siduk Adin. You're walking to bury this body, and you stop 7 times. All right, so let's see if we can figure it out. Why are we stopping? Any thoughts? Okay.
7 days of the week, as
All right, so
in,
the 7 is definitely clearly important. It's important in Judaism. You're going to eternal rest. So
And-
the 7th day is going to be your day of rest. So I do think
And
that
also-
7 is that connection.
but not just that, the piece of the 7 days is that saying goodbye to all of creation and then going to the rest.
Mm-hmm. And going, by the way, from one world to the next, right? Shabbat happens, you rest, and then you move on, right? So if in this kind of end of life idea, you're moving on to Halam Haba. So yeah, you're in this moment of rest that's going to move on to the next world. But why the stopping? Why are we stopping? Sheila, I see well, you want to say something. Yes.
Yeah. In the old days, the bride would also stop. She didn't just walk straight down, but she would walk, her feet then went together, 1, 2,
Mhm.
3, 4.
And I never thought about this, but
there
actually,
was you didn't just walk down the aisle. And I think the same thing for the groom and the others.
So I think that the reasons for the stopping that you're talking about might be different, but we do have 7 in the wedding ceremony, because in a traditional wedding there is this part where the bride walks around the groom 7 times, right? Again, we're in this transitional state. We talked about this last time. What color do you wear at a wedding?
White.
White.
Now,
what color do we wear? What
but
color?
you didn't always wear white. White is since Queen Victoria.
Well, that's on the Christian world. On the truth is, what traditionally what did men wear at their wedding?
Well, they wore a white kittel, but a bride didn't. You didn't have white.
All right, so, right, but it's the same idea of this white. Why is white important? Again, I said this last time. We wear white three times in our life. We wear it on the Chagim, on Yamim Norim, like Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. We wear it at your wedding, and you wear it at your death. And it's a color of transition.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
But what about the custom to wear a kittel if you're leading a Seder?
Right. So we talked about it. Someone brought that up last time as well. And I said, again, not my custom, but I would also say it fits in line, because what you're doing at the Seder, you're going from Egypt to Israel. You're making it from slavery to freedom, right? You're making these major transitions in your life. And in fact, to throw back to Rambam, my sage I like to go to a lot to, he actually makes a very clear point that at the Seder, you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah of the Seder if you just tell the story. The way you have to actually fulfill the mitzvah of Seder is you have to figure out how you were free this year that you weren't last year. If you can't figure that out, you haven't fulfilled the mitzvah of the Seder. So that's really the goal behind it, is to say, how do I transition? What is my new freedom that I have? And I mean, this is off topic to the Seder. I will talk to my kids about, I always will use it when they're like in kindergarten, they're learning their letters. And I'll say, you're starting to read. Your freedom. You don't have to trust me you're starting not to be able to have to trust me for what that sign says up there. You're going to have more freedom now to be able to look at things and understand it on your own. That's a new level of freedom for you, right? And I think that we need to do that, but it's still this transition from in slavery to freedom. My father-in-law is a Syrian Jew, has Syrian roots, and we actually will take the matzah and he will say Fun Gaich, which in Arabic means where have you been? And he says Mitzri, Egypt. And then he goes, Fun Reich, where are you going? And you say Yerushalayim, to freedom. That is part of the Seder. It's this idea of we're going from slavery to freedom. So again, in these 7 stops, they might have a piece to it as well of this transition, this new space from single to married, from life to death, and like the afterlife. But there's also this piece of stopping. what could be it's very simple if you think about it. When we stop, we're making a statement here. We have to take this person to the burial place.
But we don't want to rush. We don't want to rush.
We're not excited to do it. There's a hesitance. I don't want to bury this loved person, this loved one. I have to do it. It's my obligation to that person. It's the way I show my love to them. But I'm not excited about it. I'm going to slow it down. I'm going to take my time because it's not something easy. It's a mixture because we are supposed to be zirizi makdimim lemitzvah, excited to do mitzvot. But in this case, we're not actually so excited to do a mitzvah. We need to be like a little bit more paused. So we had our hesped. By the way, if someone was died unfortunately yesterday and was being buried today, they wouldn't have the hesped traditionally. There's no eulogy on a day, at a joyful day, on a day you don't say tachanun. But I will tell you what every rabbi in America will do. They'll say, you are not allowed to do a hesped. You're not allowed to say a eulogy today. It's against the rules. But how could I not talk about Shmuel? He was such an important person, and then go straight into a hesped.
Is that, it's funny when you say it, the way you said it was exactly the way my brother-in-law's rabbi said it when my mother was being buried. He said, they were not supposed to have a hesped because her yurtzeit was fifth night. And he said, but what can I do? Her son-in-law is a rabbi, and gave it over to my husband.
Right.
Usually
I wouldn't
even,
said,
the same words that you said, the same
right.
expression.
I wouldn't actually put it about the rabbi. I would say, she was such an important person. How can I not talk about her? Right? She's the kedusha. And again, there's a piece of kedusha about people. Again, we when we talk about arons, we talk about putting two different things in an aron: a Torah and a person. Right? When we bury someone, they're buried in an aron. There's kedusha in a person. Okay, so then we lower the body. Different rabbis will have different rules about, can the workers press the little button to start the machine going down, or does it have to be the Jewish community? Traditionally, in antiquity, it was the Jewish community who did it, because we, again, are obligated to take care of our loved ones. We don't leave it to anybody else. It's our commitment to this person. And this is where this term starts coming in of Chesed Shel Emet, right? I want to be very mindful, because I always am mindful, between mitzvah and chesed. You are doing a mitzvah that is mitzvah hamet, but this mitzvah hamet is also referred to as chesed shel emet, which is the greatest form of charity. That's what chesed shel emet means. Chesed shel emet literally would mean the charity of truth, but it really means the most pure form of charity. And again, Rabbi Plofker, who I hear do these funerals so often, will tell you, and he'll say to you, when you go and you're at you're at a party and you ask someone for a ride. It's a chesed. You're doing a nice thing it's that person's doing a nice thing, giving you a ride. But there might be a presumption that next time he needs a ride, he's going to call you up, and he's going to say, "Hey, you gave me the ride last time. Can I get a ride from you this time?" And there might be a little bit of this bartering of, I do something good for you, you do something good for me, and that's the world that this works in. This is a little bit different. This is, I'm going to do something for you now, and you will never be able to repay me. I'm going to take care of you in this final moments, knowing there is no way that you can get up and say thank you. And in fact, when I have volunteer groups at the cemetery and I meet with them at the end of their cleaning up of they get all the leaves done, I say, I want to thank you, but not on behalf of me or the institution. I want to thank you on behalf of all those people that you helped there, who were buried 112 years ago and have no one left to clean up their graves, and you made sure that they had a cared for grave. And I want to thank you on behalf of them, because they can't anymore. Right? I want these children to understand this is what the real holiness of this is these people can't say thank you. Little fun side fact: if you are a Grateful Dead fan, the term Grateful Dead is the exact same thing. The Grateful Dead were once called the Warlocks. Once upon a time, I don't know if anybody is a Deadhead, but they were once called the Warlocks. There was another band called the Warlocks, and they tried to figure out a new name. And Jerry Garcia looked up history of different stories, and there was one about a dead person who was grateful for other people taking care of his body and burying them, and he was the Grateful Dead. That was the name of the story. So that's actually how this term comes around. The same idea. It's this Chesed, Shel, Emet. So it's just a little interesting history. Okay, so the body is now lowered into the ground, and in my personal opinion, now comes the hard part, at least emotionally. We're now going to actually bury the body. We will take the dirt. Well, there'll be shovels around. We take the dirt and we put it on the coffin. We cover up the grave. A few things about this. There are two pretty strong customs about this burial part. Custom number one is we don't pass the shovel. You always put the shovel back in the earth, again, for the same thing as the 7 stops. No one's excited to do this mitzvah. I don't want to pass on this burden to you. You want to do this burden, you need to pick it up yourself. I don't want to put it on anybody else to do this hard work. So I'm going to put the shovel back in the ground. And the second piece is that traditionally people will do the first shovel with the shovel upside down to say that this is unusual. This is a weird thing we're doing. This isn't normal work that we're working on. It's not normal shoveling. It's not like me going in my backyard. It's something uncomfortable. And so I'll do the first one upside down, and then afterwards, all the rest of them can be done normally. So again, you do the first one upside down. You keep on burying with the rest normally, and when you're done, you put it back in the dirt. You don't hand it from person to person.
But you know, it's sometimes today that they do hand it person to person. Like, for example, someone will give it to me because I cannot, for me to go put it, get it out from the pile is hard. It also means I have to go closer to that pile. In other words, for older people or people with problems.
100%. And I would say two things about that. One I'll pause on a little bit later, but on this piece is I was very cognizant to say these are customs. This isn't the law, but these are the traditions, right? And so with tradition, you have a little bit more flexibility than with law. So the legal piece to it is the coffin should be covered. Doesn't mean you need to get all the way up to the top of the earth, but that when you're doing this burial, it really you should get enough dirt that you can't see the coffin anymore. On the edges, on the front, on the back, on the top, you shouldn't see it anymore. That usually is an expectation that we have. That is the law. There will be people who will be more traditional about it. I was just at a funeral where someone was perfectly correct by letting that happen, and the Froome family came in and said this wasn't good enough and wanted to bury all the way up to the top of the earth. Again, nothing wrong with doing that, but you don't have to. And I'll tell you again, going back to my Florida days, if it's 105 degrees and I have an older client, an older group of people that are coming for this funeral, it's not. I have to make a value decision for that person and say,
Yeah.
we're going to finish the funeral now. We're going to do what's needed for these people, so that way, if it's unsafe for them to be out for this long, we'll take care of this. And if you want to stay afterwards and do all the burial, far be it for me to stop you. But we're going to do the Kaddish. We're going to finish this off. We're going to say goodbye to the mourners, and then you can continue on. And it's totally within your right. And that's usually how I'll deal with it. The other thing I would say from Florida, this is the other part of the making it easier for people. In Florida, again, we had a clientele that was much older when I was in my pulpit, and it was hard for them to do the burial on their own. So the workers actually knew well enough on how to help me out there. They would leave the dirt in the machine, in the big hoeing machine that they had took the dirt out with, and they left it in this big one. And when the people could no longer finish, and we still had to finish it, they would have me go. They would say to me, "Hey, Rabbi, can you come over here and press this lever?" And I would go on the machine. I'd press the lever, and all the dirt from the big machine would pour in, and then fulfilling the idea that the Jewish community is doing the burial, even though it's all set up by the workers. They understood that this is a way we can make compromise for what the family wants and what the tradition is. The other thing that often happens, and I just saw it recently in a more traditional funeral, is a desire to round the dirt. And I actually asked Rabbi Plofker, why are they rounding the dirt? So instead of making it level, they want to make a circle about it. And the best he could come up with is they don't want there would be a tradition that it doesn't look like there's a coffin there. It's almost like you've made this little tomb there. You don't want to see the like flatness of it. You want to see a curvature. I don't understand it, but you should. I want to share it because if you are at a funeral in a more traditional world, you will see this curvature of the earth. And if you try to flatten it out, they're going to say, no, 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 don't flatten it out. We want this curvature.
You have a curvature when you see the gray. You can tell initially when someone has just been buried because the earth is higher up.
Right.
Then it's not flat. It is like a little mound. Not very.
Right. And so if you try to flatten it out, they actually want that as their custom. They want that curvature. Again, no one could give me a really good answer for it other than they didn't want to see the coffin or like that square shape. They wanted that rounded shape. They wanted to look different. All right. So the last piece I really want to show you, and we're going to have a little bit of conversation about, is the Kaddish. All right. So the history of Kaddishes in general is a very interesting one. There are many different Kaddishes that we think about. So if you think about it in your tefillah, usually you see 2 different Kaddishes, or 3 different Kaddishes. You see Chatzi Kaddish, the shorter Kaddish, Kaddish Shalem, the longer Kaddish, Kaddish the Rabbanan, the Rabbi's Kaddish, and Kaddish Atom is for mourners, right? That is what you traditionally see, but there's actually another Kaddish that is said, and it's said at 2 different occasions. It's said either when you finish learning a section of Talmud or a whole a book of Talmud or a whole section of Mishnah, what you do is when you're doing a hadron, when you're having that's what that is called. It's you have to have you're mandated to have a celebratory meal when you do that. So you know that you'll see at summer camps, for example, they will finish studying Talmud over the 9 days when you're supposed to only eat dairy, because this overrides the dairy rule. You have to have meat at a siyum. But the other time you say a hadron kaddish, traditionally, is at burial. And I'll show it to you because I took it out here. You'll see it's a little bit different. So again, right, you have the Yikadal Vikadashamei Rabbah, right? The Alma, Div, and now it's D, and it's staged. He atid it had te. The Achie, Mite, the Aske, Yiton, Leche, Alma, Ul Mivne, Harta, the Yerushalayim, the Shlila, and it keeps on going on. And you see it's a much longer Kaddish. It has that thing until you get down to, I'll highlight it here so you guys can see it, right? The Yehei Shlomo Rabba Bin Shemai Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevarach Le'olam Omei Almaya, and then you get back to the normal Yiparach Vishtabach, that whole piece down here. And then you get into the Rabbanan stuff. Al Yisrael Ve'al Rabbanan Ve'al Tamidehon Ve'al Kol Tamidehon Ve'al Kol Man Deskim Ve'Reita. That whole piece, and then you get into V'Hadin V'Di V'Chol Atar V'Atar. Yehei Lachon Shlomo Rabba China V'Chista V'Rachami V'Chai Yarachi V'Zenei V'Chei Fornak Nami Yishmei Kodon V'Yishmaya V'Yimru Amen. But this whole piece here,
Who says that? Just the rabbi, or the?
So this is what's interesting. In our communities, people very rarely say it, and I'll tell you why. Traditionally, the people who are the Krovim, this is the Kaddish they said. And in fact, even if you go into the Orthodox world, that's still the Kaddish that's going to be said. I can tell you what my teachers at JTS told me and why why they said don't do this longer Kaddish. You don't want to make someone feel embarrassed in
they
this
don't
moment
know
that
it.
they're going to stumble over their words. And if they're comfortable with Kaddish, then why make them feel uncomfortable in this moment? When I've talked to Orthodox rabbis about it, I'll tell you their perspective is one, yeah, it is uncomfortable. It's something that I've only been able to say Hadron and finish a Masechet of Talmud 3 times in my life. It's not a common thing to do. It's a real achievement. And so I will break my teeth on this every single time I say it. Okay, it's a time you're going to break your teeth. It's a time where things aren't going to be easy. So that's the logic on the other side. Is like it's okay. It's okay the words aren't going to come out so smoothly. This isn't a performance piece. You are in a state of mourning. So the Orthodox world will say that's okay. And I gotta say, I the other thing that they don't say that I kind of like about this piece is the metaphor we're saying. It is a great achievement to study a whole book of Talmud. And everybody's life is this great achievement. The people, their lives have had so much meaning and impact. And it shouldn't our final Kaddish that we say, which I mean I can show you why we use this one. It's very clear in the English, which I'll show you in a second. But shouldn't we say this Kaddish of accomplishment at someone's funeral? It sounds meaningful to me. I'll tell you, I typically don't use it. I typically use the traditional Kaddish when I do it because I know people are more comfortable with it. But I would say that if I had someone who never says Kaddish, if they were totally unaffiliated, I might use the transliteration of this Kaddish over the transliteration of the other Kaddish because they're going to stumble over both sides, and I might as well give them the traditional, the more traditional option if they have it. But it's I could see it both ways, and I kind of want to bring it up to conversation. Just before I bring it up to conversation, I want to show you why. It's very kind of simple to look at why this becomes the Kaddish of the end of life. Which, if you look over here, in this world that he is destined to renew and give life to the dead and raise them to eternal life and build the Yerushalayim Habriya and complete the Beit HaMikdash in its midst. Right? That is the reason why I would hazard a guess to say that's the reason why we say this bracha is because it is about resurrection here. The next world. When we reach the next world, this is what we're going to achieve. We're going to be able to come back and we will be one and we'll be in Halam Haba. And that's what's talking about in this. Whereas the normal Kaddish has nothing to do with it, right? The normal Kaddish says nothing about death. And the reason why we say it is, even in spite of this trauma that I am currently facing, I still believe in God. That's the statement of Kaddish on a normal statement. Is I in spite of everything, I'm still believing in God. So I'll leave it up to you. What do you think about the using the Hadron Kaddish versus using the traditional mourner's Kaddish at a funeral? Okay.
I feel very strongly that it should be the Hadron because that marks it as something different.
Okay. Anybody else have thoughts on the Hadron versus the non-Hadron?
Unless you discuss it with someone beforehand, they won't know what's coming off.
Right.
And
I
I
think
don't know.
that's a major piece to it.
What would be interesting, I don't have the Madrich anymore, but for the RA, but I wonder if it's in there.
It is, and they say the old Madrich and the new Madrich. The new Madrich even has like
The Madrich,
say
by
option
the
1 or
way,
say
is the
option 2.
guide. They don't know.
What?
Is the guy
Sorry,
just tell
the
the
rabbi's
people.
guide. I have it in my. See if I think I have it right down here. I'll give me 1 second here. I'll pull it in my backpack. In my line of work, I always keep it with me. This is the Moradera. This is the more recent one. I have somewhere my father's one that's the older edition, the 1980s one. But yes, they have both brachot. that are the Kaddish that are said. And by the way, just so you know, as I'm looking through it, Kaddish is said after other prayers, of course, that are being said there. There are other Tehillim, the other Psalms are being said. Most significantly, people will notice there'll be the Al Maleh. The Al Maleh is a traditional memorial prayer. Just so people actually understand about Al Maleh, it actually is a statement that you're making a promise. You're supposed to be giving tzedakah for that Al Maleh. When you say Al Maleh, you say, I remember my loved one, and in their honor, I'm going to give tzedakah, like for their name, for their sake. So anytime I have Yisker, I am always very cognizant the day after to go online and give it to a charity in their name, because that's something I've made that obligation for. And that's the same at that funeral. You make that obligation. The truth is, at a funeral, you're already doing several forms of tzedakah probably. When you pay that rabbi, that can be your tzedakah fee, because it's not, again, the funeral industry is not a cheap industry. So I give you the patur, the exemption for that. But in general, when you say Yiskor, you're making a promise that I'm going to give tzedakah. Yeah, I think that the Hadron Kaddish it's definitely used in the RA manual. And what I think is interesting is we're now moving on, because it's one of the last things we do in the burial, from what the needs are for the person to what the needs are for the mourner. Right? How is the mourner going to be able to do this? And I think you need to know your audience a little bit, and you say, for that mourner, this longer Kaddish is what they need and what they want. And for this other mourner, feeling like they can be confident in this moment where they've lost all confidence, or in this difficult moment, feeling that they feel in some security that they at least know the words they've heard their entire life, that could be very useful for them too. And I think to me as the rabbi, it's a decision in the moment to say, oh, okay, we need to decide this out.
As long as they know what it is they're saying, if they understand what they're saying, I think
That's
that
fair,
makes a
although
difference.
there's a bit, it's true, although I wonder how many times we say our tefillah and we don't actually think about what we're saying either. But yes, we should be comfortable with our word. Like, to me, it's about the comfort. If it's gonna hurt them to be forced to say these extra words, I don't think you should force them to do it. If they're in a space where either the words, no matter what, are going to be difficult, okay, maybe I'd go with this. If you're going to go where they're going to be comfortable using these words, or they really want this, because they know this is part of their tradition, then I think that it has meaning and has power. Okay, so with that, we've gone through our burial. We have a few weeks off, and we're going to go on to our Shiva piece, and Shiva Shloshim. What are the proper decorum? What are the correct practices? What are some of the no-nos that get done? I have a funny video from the Frum world that I can share with you all. That we can talk about some of those mistakes that often happen. Before I close out, are there any final questions about the burial piece? I also realized I didn't talk about Matzeh Vod, which was something that one person asked about. So I will remember to make sure to start off with Matzeh Vod too.
And
you're right.
Kohanim in this situation too.
Right. So yeah, we can talk a little bit about Kohanim, but sorry, Matzeh Vod I also didn't translate. Tombstones. That we will talk about tombstones. But yeah, Kohanim is a whole nother piece. Again, if you're a Krov, al regel achat, if you are one of those immediate family members, you're allowed to go in for the burial for that. If not, traditionally people do not go in the burial for that. All right, well, with that, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I'll see you in a few weeks. Enjoy a last great night of Hanukkah, Chag Urim Sameach, and I will see you after Secular New Year.